Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Happy Friday. We're jumping in here to a live Q&A. What's on your mind? All topics, health, nutrition, functional medicine. I'm here for y'all. All right, so a couple things. One article came out this last week looking at a spit test that looks at 500, what did it say? 531 different genes that are associated with heart attacks and strokes. 535 different genes. And they found that there was a certain, if you had these genes or more of these genes, you had a risk factor that was 3.34 times higher and higher in developing blood pressure and or blood pressure leading to a stroke or heart attack because the heart has to pump higher and or you could just have a stroke. So this little genetic test is out. Now the question is, what do people do with it? Does that mean you're now being put on statins sooner? Does that mean you're now being put on a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet sooner? So the question is, okay, great, you have this information. Now what is the next step? And that is always the concerning thing, because if you don't know how to use a tool or you don't know what the next step is, then you may provide the wrong information. Let's see here. Got a question that chimed in already. Let me bring this on my screen. All right. Saeed writes in, hey, doctor, does H. pylori cause insomnia? Well, it can. Why can H. pylori cause insomnia? Because if it affects your stomach acid, right, the urease produced by the H. pylori can take the urea from protein metabolism, and it can take that and it can spit out urea and ammonia. And ammonia has got a nice high pH of about 11. You also spit out some CO2 with that as well. That's why the H. pylori breath test, it measures a lot of CO2. So let's say you increase the ammonia, that's got a pH of 11. That's going to lower your stomach acid. So when you have H. pylori, it can actually lower your stomach acid levels. When your stomach acid is lower, it's harder to ionize minerals. That's kind of get them absorbable in your bloodstream. So things like magnesium, and also breaking down minerals, L-theanine, serotonin, like from tyrosine, or serotonin from 5-HTP or tryptophan. So these are important amino acids that run your brain chemistry, help with sleep, help with stress, help with sedation and relaxation, GABA, magnesium. So if you have an H. pylori, if you have an infection, it can really affect that. And then not to mention the leaky gut and the stress in the digestive tract regarding the absorption of all these things. So yeah, it's kind of a little complicated, but I hope that kind of draws it out for you what the end result is. And sleep and mood and all that is intimately connected. Colin writes in, what are your thoughts on folinic acid versus methylfolate? Folinic acid or calcium folinate, still really good. It's one step above, let's say, like an MTHF activated folate. Folic acid isn't that good because of its, you need certain enzymes to make that conversion happen, and 50 to 70% of the population doesn't. So not good. Calcium folinate or folinic acid's okay. And then LMTHF folate is also great too. Delty writes in, does eating large amounts of carbs and fat together cause insulin spikes? Well, fat would cause virtually zero insulin spikes, but carbs would. But of course, if you're spiking insulin with a whole bunch of carbs there, that's the definition of junk food, right? Junk food typically has like a whole bunch of trans fat and or, I would say vegetable oil kind of fat with a whole bunch of refined sugar and junk. And of course, it just opens the door wide for those fats to go right into the fat cells. So of course, we want to avoid that. Even healthy fats like coconut oil with a whole bunch of sugar probably isn't the best thing in the long run either. So lots of sugar, lots of carbs, unless it's a post-workout thing. Even that, you shouldn't have a whole bunch of fat post-workout either. Let's see here. Syed writes in, my sister has the H. pylori. Can I get it? Well, it's definitely possible. I mean, you don't have to necessarily be intimate, but just sharing silverware or drinks or things like that, it's possible to catch it. Jack JMC writes in, is kombucha okay to consume if you have candida and other infections? It depends. Oh, this will be a little interesting. A lot of kombucha is higher in sugar. Now, the new labeling, the GT Days, they just got sued for like $8 million last year. And it's a little on the fence, but basically what they were doing is they were putting on the nutrient label what was in the ingredients, like what was actually in the kombucha after it fermented. So they got sued because they're like, hey, you aren't putting this much sugar. You aren't putting these nutrients in there. They're like, yeah, but that's what's in there after the fermentation process, right? You put a little bit of sugar in there. That sugar is then eaten up. Vitamins in various, antioxidants are now produced. The sugar content's less. So basically the FDA came in there and said, no, you got to actually label the sugar content before, not after. So sugar afterwards gets fermented. and you have more antioxidants. So they're making you go back to the higher amount of sugar and state that those antioxidants aren't in there, even though they're created in the fermentation process. So what does that mean? Some of the kombucha may look like it has higher sugar, but the GT Daves will be your best bang for your buck, about 2 grams of sugar per serving. And I like the ginger. The ginger aid one is great, or the trilogy is pretty good too. Delcy writes in, thoughts on green smoothies for breakfast every day. It depends. I mean, if you have a lot of digestive issues, you may want to steam it or saute it to kind of deactivate some of the goitrogens or some of the salicylates in there. That can help. If your digestion's really good and you're juicing it, mix it in with some MCT oil and some collagen. That sounds great. Jeff writes in, hey, Jeff, hope you're doing well. They put you on 500 milligrams of azithromycin. Okay. Azithromycin, that's a linea. And I have been so nauseous. I stopped taking it and taking probioflora, GABA, magnesium, ginger, deep tissue, pains. What do I do? So I would start really slow on that. If they put you on the azithromycin or the NTZ, which is a linea, to typical dose on that's 1,000 milligrams twice a day, breakfast and dinner with food. I would taper up with it, and I would use some activated charcoal to kind of help with the killing and to bind up a lot of the junk. So I'd throw in some activated charcoal in between meals, 1 hour, 3 hours after, 1 hour before, 1 to 3 caps. Just make sure you're having your BMs every day. Hope that helps, but get some binders in there. Josh writes in, could fermentation of fiber by excessive bacteria or yeast in the colon, not the small bowel, cause enough gas production to create bloating? Also, a weakness in the lower esophageal sphincter and subsequent reflux into the larynx. It's possible. I mean, if you're having a lot of bloating in general, I would be cutting out the FODMAPs and going on a low FODMAP template. If that helps, that's a good sign. That's going to help starve out some of the bacteria. And then we'd come in there, we'd support digestion, and we'd support the eradication of that bacteria. And then we start to add some of these fermentable carbohydrates back in, maybe even add some fructooligosaccharides, some prebiotics, and even resistant starch to help feed some of that good flora so it comes back. Give that a try. Jack JMC writes in, is caffeine okay to consume if you have high cortisol levels? So if you're basing that off of like an adrenal cortisol test, like a biohealth or a Dutch test, I mean, the question is, are you tired? Do you have a lot of energy issues? Maybe if you're doing a cup of green tea, that's probably okay. If you're doing 1 cup of coffee, the question is, how do you feel? Do you have a lot of anxiety? Do you have a lot of like tired but wired feelings? I need to know a little bit more info. But I would say if it's just a little bit high and you're just doing 1 cup in the morning, well, you can mix some fat in there, maybe some collagen, and that will at least time release it. But if you're feeling more anxious, irritable, moody, and you have the high cortisol, then I would probably lean on the side of not doing it if that's the case. But you got to know a little bit more about the clinical picture. All right. Josh writes in, trying to see how my symptoms are possible considering I have 3 normal SIBO tests. Yeah, it could just be a SIFO, a small intestinal fungal overgrowth. It could even be an infection outside of SIBO. That's why you need a bigger picture outside of just the breath test. Colin writes in, my wife has been having a weird chest pains lately, but it's not soft tissue type of pain. She's worried maybe some type of heart issue. It is in the upper left quadrant. So, I mean, it could be the stomach too, right? The upper left quadrant could be the stomach. It could be some heartburn or some reflux. I mean, you can always just make sure the nutrients for the heart are dialed in. Carnitine, CoQ10, magnesium, potassium dialed in. Make sure your diet's really good. Inflammatory foods out. But there could be some kind of a stomach issue or even an H. pylori issue. It's very possible. Let's see here. Colin writes in again. She's been having extremely low magnesium blood levels. There you go. Is that magnesium serum or RBC magnesium? Yep, definitely could be a connection. Definitely could be a connection. Jack JMC writes in, can I take reishi? I have a gut infection and candida. It depends. Like if you're sick or you're using it because you're kind of immunocompromised, yeah, it could be helpful. Cordyceps can also be helpful too. But in general, you want to knock out some of the gut stuff for sure. Rashan writes in, if nerves are merely messaging pathways, why is the vagus nerve considered responsible for the parasympathetic / sympathetic activity instead of the sum of the parts of the brain where the signals are generated? So in general, the vagus nerve controls parasympathetic. And if you look at it, I think it's the 10th cranial nerve. So right in the back of the brainstem, and it just kind of meanders down all the way throughout the body. So there's a handful of cranial nerves that are parasympathetic. I forget all of them, but the vagus one is going to be the big one. I'll tell you all of them that are cranial nerves and parasympathetic. Um, but in general, the vagus is going to be the big one. Sleep, relaxation, all of those are really, really, really important to help your body heal. But yeah, it's going to be oculomotor, cranial nerve number 3. That's the one that controls eye movement. Your facial nerve, which is going to be number 7. Your number 9 one, which is the tongue. That's why they say like doing like the gargling or doing the singing, because that number 9 cranial nerve is the tongue. The singing is like you're getting a lot of facial movements when you sing as well. So number 7, number 9, those are the big ones. And then number 10 is going to be like touching the tongue down and then seeing that palate reflex that looks at your cranial nerve as well. Your vagus nerve as well. And then, of course, just like sleeping, hydration, meditation. These are things that'll just naturally get the parasympathetic system going. Let's see here. Let's keep on rolling, guys. Oh, I've got a question here on Facebook. Is there any specific test for adrenal fatigue syndrome? Hey there, Mitchell. So adrenal fatigue, I mean, you would do a salivary test. You could do like a 201 adrenal test from BioHealth or a Dutch adrenal test. That's a good one to look at. Now, that's going to look at more adrenal dysfunction. It's not going to look at like adrenal failure like Addison's disease. Now, you may be able to detect it on there, but most people, when they hear about adrenal dysfunction or adrenal fatigue, they're thinking conventional Addison's disease or they're thinking Cushing's disease, and it may not fit into that category. So I hope that makes sense there. Ball writes in, I have no lactase enzyme. I cannot drink milk at all. Yeah, stay away from it. Jack writes in, are having eye floaters normal? It's not what, if not, what is the cause? It could just be inflammation. It could be certain foods could be driving it. It's hard to say. I need to know. Anytime you have excess inflammation in the body, many, many symptoms can happen. And that's the hard part of connecting a lot of disease to root cause stuff, because my job is just to cut out as much inflammation as possible. And sometimes things just magically heal up on their own because we're just addressing inflammation overall. So I couldn't give you something specific, but look at food first. Larry writes in, how to increase red blood cell levels. So number 1, adequate iron. So getting enough iron in there is going to be really important. So healthy animal protein. Veronica writes in, do you have any suggestions for people who have chemical and electrical sensitivity? Well, I mean, you can get a really good air filter. I have one over here. I have the Molecule going in my office today. I have a couple others in the house as well, other brands that are also very good as well. So that's number 1. Number 2, you can turn off your Wi-Fi at night. That can be helpful too. 3, you can get like a grounding mat, sleep on a grounding mat, or just put some EMF harmonizing devices like the Q-Link on your phone. That can be helpful as well. And I would say make sure your water is really clean as well. And then outside of that, you can do various things like activated charcoal for binding things and supporting glutathione as well. Trey writes in, so glad I caught you. I have a friend who with Cushing's and is trying some plant-based. Again, some people do well with plant-based because if they're coming from a standard American diet, eating more vegetables, cutting out sugar and alcohol and junky fats, it can make can give someone a good bang for their buck. The question is, people tend to go a little bit higher on the carb side. They may miss a lot of the good essential fatty acids. They may not get enough protein and they may have some blood sugar issues. So I think you can kind of mirror that plant-based and add a little bit of healthy proteins and fats in there, at least some fish and some egg yolks for sure. All right. Jeff writes in, I'm going to stop taking them. I've been on 3 antibiotics in the past 2 weeks. Oh man, we got to chat if you're on 3 antibiotics, brother. All right. Reach out to me so we can dial you in. I know you're dropping down the oxy. That's good. Glad that you're doing that. I would make sure that we're doing any of the herbs you recommended and just support the gut healing. We probably even want to throw some probiotics in there because those are some pretty strong antibiotics that they're giving you there, but we should check in real soon. What do you recommend for treating H. pylori? So in my line, GI Clear 2 is a common one that we use. That has clove and it has mastic gum. It also has a little bit of wild indigo in there and some berberines. We typically combine it with other herbs as well because most people have, other types of infections along with that. Josh writes in, I've used a product such as Apex's GI Synergy for over a year. Would you think this would make my gut bugs resistant to dozens of herbs using that product, leaving me with not much to try later on? I think doing something for a year like that probably isn't the best bang for your buck because there could be some resistance. So I typically don't use herbs longer than 2 months before I switch. So I would definitely look at switching for sure. Nick writes in, what do you think of pregnenolone for depression and energy? I think pregnenolone's great. It's a core part of my adrenal program. I have pregnenolone drops that I've manufactured that work great. Okay. Revelation writes in, I wake up every hour starting at 3 with severe sweating, heart racing. I feel terrible when I'm sleeping. Any input? It depends. I'm not really sure if you're a female or a male. I don't know if you're menopausal. If it's a menopausal woman I'm speaking with, there could be some hormone issues we have to address. If you're not menopausal, it could be some infections, some gut issues, because they have opposite sleep and wake cycles as we do, and they could be more active at nighttime and waking you up and stimulating your adrenals. Could also be some blood sugar stuff. Could be going low blood sugar, low cortisol at night, and that could be jacking up your adrenaline and cortisol, which is stimulating you. So it could be a couple of things. Colin writes in, any benefit to taking fish oil that is 100% EPA or 100% DHA to prevent competition for uptake? Hard to say. Sounds like you've been maybe listening to a lot of Jack Cruz recently, but I mean, if you're going to go 100% DHA, I'd say maybe if you're trying to treat like a brain injury, but in general, I would just take fish oil as it comes. Just make sure it's nice and clean. I don't see a problem with that. Depends on your goals. How can you increase your IgA levels? Healthy, good probiotics can be helpful. Beneficial yeast like Saccharomyces boulardii can also be helpful. Gut healing, soothing nutrients like aloe, TGL, L-glutamine, those could be helpful. And then you can even do high quality colostrum can also be helpful for IgA. Rebecca writes in, pain in the upper right abdominal area when drinking water for just a few seconds. Do I have a hiatal hernia? It never caused pain before. Hard to say. I mean, do you have that upper right area? I think potentially gallbladder issues as well. Do you have a history of gallbladder issues? Number 2, did it just happen with water? Does it happen with cold water or room temperature water? Because that kind of matters too. Cold water tends to sit in your intestines longer because, if you're drinking really cold water, if your body just releases it throughout your whole intestines, it could create like intestinal shivering. So a lot of times the water's colder, it sits in your stomach a lot longer, and that may be causing something. So it could be a hiatal hernia. You may need to get your gut looked at to see what is going on. But try making sure the water isn't as cold too. Yeah. So Revelation writes in female and menopause. So yep, that's what you got to look at. Low hanging fruit is going to be getting the hormones dialed in. Paul writes in, can I do a SIBO test before doing the GI map? Yeah, you can. I don't see a problem with that. I typically don't recommend it, but if there's a lot of SIBO symptoms, yeah, well, why not? Roshan writes in, any reason a body cannot be simultaneously experiencing both sympathetic and parasympathetic dominance. For example, you are in deep sleep meditation but are suffering from an inflammatory autoimmune issue. It's a great question. I would just think that the stimulation from the autoimmune issue would just prevent you from going full on into a parasympathetic state. So think of it as like a seesaw. So if you're like, if this is parasympathetic down here and this is sympathetic, if we start to come out of the parasympathetic, right, it's because the sympathetic is starting to push us down. So think of it as like a seesaw. Colin writes in, any reason someone would feel worse taking an adrenal glandular? Yeah, if your cortisol is already higher and you're already overstimulated, very possible. Jeff's back. Thank you. I'm on 1 cap of ProBioFlora. Just can't get rid of the nausea. Well, I would add in the ginger tea. Ginger is going to really be helpful. Make it strong. That'll help with the nausea. And then also add in some of the binders to help bind up any of the dead debris that you're mobilizing from the antibiotics. Okay, Veronica writes in, sometimes people react to smart utility meters with heart racing and sweating. Do you know if you have a smart meter on your house? I do not, but I did on my last house. And honestly, it wasn't really a big deal. I had a meter out to check it out, like one of these meters, and the signal only went forward. So I went to the side of it. I went behind it. and I found that it went only forward. So for me, it wasn't really a big deal at all. It just depends on how close you are and how your house is set up. But you can get like where is it? I got a tri-field meter hanging around somewhere. Uh, it's somewhere in my office here, but I have a couple of meters, and then you can just go around and you can start testing things and see what happens. And then you can just adjust it. I think you can get like something that goes over it. Some places allow you to pay to pull it out, but you got to pay a little bit more to pull it out. Let me give Facebook people a little bit of love here. Let's see. Agnes writes in, how do I not crave sugar? First thing is, don't jump on that blood sugar roller coaster when you start your day. Have a good protein and fat-based breakfast, and don't go longer than 4 to 5 hours without having some high-quality protein and fat. That's the best way to start. Don't jump on the roller coaster. All right. All right. Very good. What's the difference between your ProBioFlora 60 and the 90? No, I have a 60 and 120. The 60 is new and formulated. It's got a little bit of Infantis blend. It's got a little bit of fructooligosaccharides, prebiotics in there. There's a couple other specific probiotic strains in there as well. It's about 5 or 6 more strains. That will be the main one I'll be using moving forward as I reformulated it. But that's the big thing. The other one has some phage in it. The ProBioFlora 120 has the phage in it, which has some beneficial effects as well. Both really good probiotics. Okay, excellent. Roshan writes in about eye floaters. Chiropractic helped my aunt eye floaters by adjusting C2 or maybe C3. She said it may be interfering with optical nerve. I mean, yeah, if your upper cervical spine is not working optimally, getting a really good chiropractic adjustment that's specific can help. Your brain communicates, from all the nerves in your spine up to the brain through the brain stem. So if we don't have good afferent input, good communication, then that can disrupt many, many parts of the body for sure. So I think that's great. Colin writes in, any reason for ashwagandha causing a lack of focus? It's a great herb, but only issue is I seem to have with it. Well, the question is, are you doing any other herbs at all to help with your adrenals? Is that the only one? I would probably look at more dopamine supporting amino acids, and it could be an adrenaline issue and or a dopamine issue. So I would look there personally next. Tanya writes in, what are the healthy and functional ranges for vitamin D? So for vitamin D, 50 to 100 is pretty good. Closer to 100 if you have an autoimmune condition. B12, it depends. I mean, typically that range is like a 400 to 1,000. That's a B12 serum, but the gold standard for that will be a transcobalamin or a methylmalonic acid. You can do those in like an organic acid test. And then your other question is, if it lets me, iron. See, for ferritin, for a female above 30, ideally 60 to 70, iron saturation 25 and above. And then for thyroid, it really depends. TSH around 1, T4 free between 1 and 1.5, T3 free above 3, and then antibodies, in the teens, the low teens for the TPO and less than 1 for a thyroglobulin. T3 total above 100, T3 free above 3, T4 total 6 to 10. Again, I work with these numbers all day long, so it's like riding a bike. All right. Bunch of other questions here. I'm not going to be able to get to them all. Let me just go through here. Are chiropractors with Gonstead certification any better than ones without? I mean, it just depends. Like when I did more chiropractic techniques, I did diversify because I just liked the contact here. I felt like it was more comfortable. Gonstead had a contact here and was a little bit more upright on the seated cervicals. So for me, I liked diversify, but they're both great techniques, and it just depends, it depends what's going on, and a good Gonstead chiropractor can work wonders for sure. Lindsay writes in, what supplement can I give my 10-year-old daughter? It depends. I mean, a good multivitamin, amino acids, maybe enzyme or HCl. It really depends what's going on, but I don't see there being any limitations really outside of hormones. We really want to stay away from the hormones. And if we're giving killing herbs, we want to make sure it's dosed appropriately. What does a typical day look like for you? So for me, I mean, I get up, I have a really good cold shower. I get up, I do some really good coffee with butter and MCT oil. I like to just have a good attitude of gratitude, kind of get that good parasympathetic stimulation going. And then I just jump into my day and see patients. I have 2 to 3 really awesome, great meals during the day. Get my, on point with my supplement routine. I try to do a little bit of moving while I'm working all day to get that energy going. Great question. Pikachu writes in, I'm under 30. I sit down job working every morning. Wake up in the morning with weights, diet, salad, grilled chicken, protein shake, pain in the heart area. Hurts when I move, wake up sore, stinging pain. Oh, I need a little bit more intel on there, but you need a good functional medicine workup. Definitely need to get the gut looked at, and you need to see a really good chiropractor to make sure your joints and your nervous system is functioning adequately. Josh writes in, does the herb bacterial resistance last forever? I mean, I think it would definitely improve over time, but the problem, I know the GI Synergy formula, the biggest problem with that is it uses a lot of lower dose herbals and a lot of different ones. Yeah, we call it pixie dusting. So I would find a couple of herbs that you haven't done and use them at a higher dose. So, I mean, personally, I would do like a silver. I know that's one that's not in that protocol. You could do a para 1, which is a Pyramosa pudica. That's not in that protocol. And could also do a higher dose wormwood or artemisia as well. That's a good possibility. Veronica writes in, my son gets nauseous when he eats meat or dairy and seems to crave sugar and other carbs. Any idea? Well, number one, he's probably not making enough stomach acid or enzymes. The first thing to do is pull out the dairy, though, and then you can just try some enzymes to really see how he does on the digestive side and make sure he chews his food up enough. Kids are notorious just for swallowing their protein. And I would start with that and see how you do. You can add in some enzyme wafers as well. MM writes in, adrenal fatigue over 5 years in recovery, low functioning pituitary, menstrual cycle worked only on pituitary glandulars, and not hot flashes and fat growing in thighs, hips, and low belly. What to do? I need a little more intel. It's just not enough. I mean, is your cycle good now? Is your cycle on track? If it's not, I would use some herbs to really help support the HPA, HP gonadal axis to get that on track. I'd also want to ensure that your gut is doing well and your digestion as well. So I just need more input though. Lindsay writes in, suggestion for you. Became a fan of your supplements. A childcare line would be much appreciated. Yeah, I mean, I just don't see enough children to order enough product to make it beneficial, but I appreciate it. It's a good points. Regarding that, a lot of stuff can be used. It just depends. A lot of kids want liquids and want powders. So you can't really mix and match a lot of the adult stuff, but we will open some of the capsules. We'll put it in a smoothie or a shake to make it easier. And there's some enzyme wafer products that I use in other lines that do really well. So I appreciate it. Good feedback though. You're welcome, Josh. And then Colin writes in, have you experimented with using Schisandra berry? Yeah, I think it's great. It's another adrenal adaptogen that we can add into that category. So yeah, very helpful. And then MM writes in, 47 years old, slender, healthy diet. Yeah, I think you got to look more at the gut, MM. And I think you have to, like to see some testing like a Dutch adrenal and see where you're at there and see where you're at with the gut. That'd be important. All right, y'all. Hope everyone is doing great. Phenomenal chatting with y'all. I'll be back on Monday to chat a little bit more. You guys have a phenomenal weekend. We'll talk soon. Take care.